Okay, we're here today to do a quick video in our new shooter series, and this is a requested video. And the topic is, how do I take the barrel out of my uber slender long rifle with no possibility of doing damage to the stock, and how often do I take it out? So to tackle the how often, I take it out once a year. I may take it out another time if it's been a wet hunting season or whatever, and I'm not quite sure what's going on under there. I may do it more often, but about once a year. And how to do it with zero possibility of damage, there's no way to do that. These things are slender. There's 1/8 of an inch between your bottom of your ramrod channel and the bottom of your barrel channel on most slender long rifles. So later kind of golden age or southern guns that are super slender. This stock right here is 3/16 thick at about the thickest, and the web between the barrel and the ramrod channels 1/8 of an inch maybe. So super delicate. You know, people think of a gun stock as holding the barrel. With these long rifles, that's not the case at all. The barrel is supporting the stock barrel. So let's go ahead and jump on that right now. And the first thing I'll do is take this lock out. That'll be real quick because it's got one screw. And the second thing we'll do is take that ramrod pipe, ramrod out. So ramrod out, lock out. The only thing holding this thing together now is, well, everything that was originally holding it together, the pins and the 2 screws and the tang. But everything's out of our way. So we'll put this thing back in sideways and we will get these pins out. Now, the trick to these pins are, you need to find out what you've got if you didn't build it. And that means the pins could be tapered and put in one way or the other, and the way they went in originally, the opposite way they have to come out. They won't push through. Now these pins, I built this, and so I know these pins are just straight round stock, and they can go in either way. The second thing, and this is important so you're not chipping out any wood, is whatever you're going to use to push those pins out need to be a little bit smaller in diameter than your pins. And it could be within, 10 thousandths, but it's got to be a little bit smaller. You don't want either to catch the wood or to, as you push this through, to bore your pin holes out even more, and then your pins are going to be loose in there. So you got to get the pins out and got to get these screws out. So what I do is I'll come up here carefully, place it, and give it a pop. Now, they may or may not be loose enough to get out. If they're not, a little pair of pliers, loose enough to get out with your fingers, little pair of pliers. Now, when you take these pins out, orient them in such a way on your table or wherever you're keeping them that you know pin 1, pin 2, pin 3. If you have multiple pins. So this one's going to go on the table to the left. And I think I can finger pull that out. I can. And that is to the center, because all of these pins are different lengths. This one up here in the forestock is going to be thicker, and toward the rear is going to be thicker. And then these, as you get up closer to the nose cap, are going to be thinner, so they're not going to fit in other holes. So okay, and that one. All right, so we've got those out. And now we're going to get the tang screws out. Simple. You just unscrewing these. And the same thing, these screws, if there's multiple, are going to be different lengths. Hopefully not different sizes, but different lengths. as you can see. Now you need to check these for any rust and then lay these down left to right where they orient in your tang. So now it's just friction held in there. Nothing holding it on except for the friction of the tang. And you can look at that tang. That's a very well fit lollipop tang. So you have to be super careful with that. If you bend that tang, it's never going back in right. So, or it's going to take hours and hours and hours to get it back in right. So it's pretty simple, but you've got to be super aware of your flex along here as this barrel's coming out. So basically what I do is hold this in two hands, hold it up here, hold it back here somewhere, and you're going to tap the heel of your stock on something soft. This is being tapped on my Budweiser stool here, and we're just going to hold this loose enough up here in my hand that it's going to want to fall into my hand. Okay, so you see that has come loose. So now with the stock resting on something, I'm carefully going to let the weight of the barrel pull itself out of the stock. And once it comes loose, then I'll set this barrel aside and put the stock right back in a safe place. So she's been in, I don't know, about a year, something like that, and the bottom looks fine. I don't see any rust, maybe the tiniest bit, but not much. And that's when you're going to go along here and just rub this off. You know, it doesn't take much. Just give it a rub. If you have any rust, kind of dig at it a little bit. But this is clean. And wipe her off. And put the barrel down somewhere safe. Because that lollipop tang, if you drop this tang on the ground, it's bent up. So let me double check this tang and make sure that is just dry grease. Tiniest bit of rust up there. Not much. Not even hardly enough to worry about. And wipe it off. All right, so we're going to look in here, see if we have anything in here that shouldn't be. And then when you take one of these stocks apart like this, you've got to be super careful what you do with that. See, that's wobble right there. This is thin. So don't lean on it. Don't brace yourself on it. Put something down here at the end that's going to hold this end of it, but realize, I don't know if you can see that, but that is flex. Super fragile. You can put, if you're one of the 2 or 3 times a year guys, you can put a little oil under there. It's not going to hold up very long. I put grease under there for a long time and it works great. This barrel has been in for a year with a thin coat of RIG grease. And RIG stands for rust inhibiting grease. It's a super grease. I've got a little grief from a few old timers about using grease, especially in a super thin stock. They said that grease will permeate into your wood and soften it over time. I haven't experienced that, but I do defer to those guys for a lot of those tidbits, because somebody who's been shooting for 60, 70 years, they've seen it all. So you can use something like Barricade Good stuff, rust inhibiting. That's what I'm going to put on it today just to give it a test and see how it holds up for next year. What a lot of those old timers and guys really talk about using underneath is wax. So all kinds of wax, any kind of wax. Clean your barrel off real good with alcohol, solvent, get all the grease off, get everything, get it perfectly cleaned, and wax under there. And put it back in. And apparently wax is the absolute best thing for it. Next time I take this barrel out, or the next barrel I do take out, I'm gonna wax it underneath, and then I'll have a year to see how that holds up. But this time we're gonna use Barricade. I do like to go, historically correct, and I've used bear grease underneath, and it's worked fine. Some spotty spots of surface rust, nothing I couldn't rub off in 5 seconds with some Scotch-Brite or steel wool, but I wasn't happy with that. So I went to the thin coat of Rig, and that has worked beautifully for me. Thin coat, you're not gopping it on, where it squeezes through the holes in your stock and all of that. You're not doing that. So real quick, get some Barricade on there. And Barricade leaves a nice thin film, rust inhibiting film. So we'll see how this holds up. And don't be afraid to try stuff, But if you're trying something that you haven't used before, then just maybe take a peek in 6 months, maybe take a peek in 3 or 4 months, just see how she's doing down there. And I'm going to put some in here. And then get out the extra. All right, so putting it back in. Be real careful where your brace is here on the end of the stock. And she's going to go back in, kind of equivalent all the way around, and put the breech all the way back, and then set it in. Give it a little tap out on the muzzle toward the breech. Make sure she's seated good, and then you're going to run along and just squeeze. And make sure she's seated all the way down. Okay? I'm going to grab a wire brush. And get any tiny bit of rust. And my guns are not Safe Queens, they're out. They're out in the woods. When I'm having lunch or whatever, leaning up against a tree, it's leaning up against a tree. If it's misty outside, it's leaning up against a tree. So I take good care of them as far as keeping them clean, but they don't live in the safe. So they are going to get some rust on the screws. They're going to get a ding or two here and there, which is the way I like it. And it's just very thin surface rust. It's not even pitting. Recently picked these up. I love antique screwdrivers and handmade screwdrivers. And so that's a part of a set of 3 I picked up from a guy who made these handles and all. Pretty cool. Love that stuff. All right, so tang screws are in. Gonna turn her back sideways. Now you do not need a workbench to do this, but it does make it a little easier. So the pins all get a little bit of oil, or in this case Barricade, on each one of them. There's no rust on them. Now, one last thing I like to do, I like to take a little bit of my patch lube And this lube I have has got a little bit of beeswax in it, so that helps hold it together. So that's it. She's all done. Happy to see that there's no rust underneath. And it's one thing I did like about the grease is I could really put a little extra all around here to seal this seam up between the stock and the barrel for when I clean, because I clean with water. And I hold a rag around this end and pour water down the bore. And there's always a little water that hits between the two. And so I always kept a little extra grease in there, just a smidge, just to seal that up against that water. And that's always worked fine for me. I've never had, with all the overspills from filling the water that I've had up there with the rag, I immediately wipe it off and get as much off of there as I can. But with that extra grease up there, I've never had any rust that was more apparent up here than anywhere else. And that's where I would get it wet the most. So that's a consideration too. We're gonna see how this barricade works. I did like the grease, thin coat, but I had an old timer wag his finger at me, so I'm always about learning stuff. And so let's try this out and see how this works. All right guys, I'm gonna put this bad boy up and then I'm going squirrel hunting. We'll see you.